so that they can preserve their culture. And French entertainment and television, they've created, part of one of their aspects is that they have created this ministry to go out and change words. So if something comes in English, they need to have a French word for it. They can't just call them French fries. They have to be whatever the French word they want to create for it. So basically they don't take French, they create their own French words for imported material. So gastronationalism is a term that a researcher came up with to kind of describe the French. It's basically the use of food production, distribution, and consumption to demarcate and sustain the emotive power of national attachment and the use of nationalist sentiments to produce and market food. So because the French are so into gastronomy and preserving their culture and making it something that they've exported to the world, and we all know that French have great food and that they pride themselves on it. So I'm going to zoom in on here and I'll show you, these are specific foods that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of: Gruyere, blue cheese, different types of wine. These are from the different elements of the country that they all pride themselves on and are very proud to tell you that this comes from my region. So the national identity is something that has kind of created this ethnocentric vibe within the French culture. The need for identity has become stronger in the globalized world. As Eric was talking about before, they've had Islamic religion come into their country. They've been attacked by during wars and had their egos kind of tempered with. So as the world becomes more globalized, they have a need to kind of hone in on what is it to be French. And with this, they become more ethnocentric. One of the studies that I did research with talked about how they looked at the French and Germans and how they looked at exoticism and what they found in recipes. And the Germans were very open to kind of looking at different foods and what other cultures ate, but the French just didn't care. They only wanted to talk about their recipes and what the French had to add to food because they knew that they were the best and that other people copied off of them to create their own techniques, but that the French originated in creating culinary arts. So kind of an example of ethnocentrism that my parents experienced while they were in France in the 1980s. My parents would go up and ask someone, "Hey, do you speak English? We're trying to find our train." And they would just very quickly babble something in French, and then my parents asked something again, they're like, "I don't speak English," in very perfect English. So they obviously knew it, but they wanted my parents to try to speak to them in French first. Or my parents had been at this hotel and had baguette after baguette after baguette for breakfast every morning. And finally my mom was like, "I'm done with it." And the lady got so mad at her that she just like threw the baguette at her. So they don't want you to challenge them, they want you to try to integrate yourself into their culture. So French food is very artistic and an artistic representation of them. However, that is not the only one. And Jared is going to talk to you about jazz and how that's another artistic representation of their culture.
Can I get that?
What do you
Can I
need?
get the podium?
Oh.
I want to stand. All right, I want some class participation. Can I get a wee wee?
Wee wee.
All right, one more time. Wee wee.
Wee wee.
And again, wee wee.
Wee wee.
Yes, I love it. Okay, so two things we didn't get to talk about were actually French fashion, which is very popular out there. So I thought, what better way to not discuss it, which I'm going to do anyway now, by wearing a shirt I got from France. Does it look French?
Yes.
Okay, I really didn't get it from France. I think I got it in Simi Valley. But I'm glad you guys thought it was French. So that makes me feel a lot better because a lot of people told me it didn't look French. Another aspect of the culture other than fashion is also the language. They have a very rich language. It's, very romantic. It's pleasant to listen to. It's easy on the ears. And so I'd like to have my friend Thomas introduce himself in French.
Bonsoir, je m'appelle Frère Thomas. Je suis américain, mais je parle français un petit peu. Good evening, my name is Brother Thomas. I'm an American, but I speak a little French.
How do you say hello in French?
Well, right now it'd be bonsoir.
Bonsoir?
Because it's good evening.
All right, well, let's give Thomas a bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
Oui, oui! No, you guys have to do it after I say it. You guys have to do it. Oui, oui!
Wee wee.
All right. Well, just as food reflects the edible artistic culture in France, the audible art in the form of music is also culturally representative, specifically post-World War I jazz in France was very influential, as well as very reflective and representative of the changing and evolving, recuperating times that were going on. It was a time of modernization, you know, things like surreal art were coming alongside. Jazz was this new form of music. They were recuperating from the war and a whole bunch of other things that they felt so intellectualized that they were just stuck in this Enlightenment era, and people were just trying to break out of it. They just got done with war and they needed something to help recover and recuperate from all this stagnant intelligence. And it also led into Afro appreciation. Before, they saw them as a primitive race or group of people, and jazz allowed them to actually evolve in their perception of these people. Next slide, please. So yeah, during the war, many new modern technologies emerged. The tank, you know, it came, it changed everything. So then submarines, you know, obviously underwater, you got above ground warfare with the tank, then you got the flamethrower, the biplane, and the machine gun. These were all new, very noisy, mechanical, technological advances for the use of war. And alongside of these, what comes with these advances is then you have to come up with new technologies to defend against them. So as well as all of these and all the noise and all the ruckus they caused, now you had new defense technologies also representing the modernization of this culture due to the war. Next slide. So as there was modernization reflected by the war, the domestic front was doing the same thing. The car horn was introduced. That's one of the first car horns. Right there. Anyway, and then you had the phonograph. People could record music and they could take it into their homes, into their living rooms, their bedrooms, wherever they wanted. You also then had the radio. But one of the most important technologies invented that helped transform music and to help create jazz was the trap set here. It's called the drum kit now. But this was the first time that they had arranged these sorts of cymbals and percussion and drums in this manner to where one person could play them all in this fashion. And so a lot of people refer to this time as a very noisy time. They were reflecting on the war and the new artillery, the tanks and the bombs and all this. And then the war is done, but now they have these car horns, they have a phonograph, they have drums banging around. And a lot of them just wanted it quiet. Jazz, it was killing time. So jazz was foreign. It was American. It was the sound of modernity and the primitive jungles all at once. So right there kind of encapsulates everything that I was saying in the beginning. It was American, it was modern, it was foreign, and then the people who played it were from the primitive jungles. It was supremely modern music for a noisy mechanical age, as represented by the, you know, just all the new technologies, just all the noise. It was the noise of the assembly line and the machine gun. But there were some people who really didn't like it. Instead of taking pity on eardrums so cruelly afflicted by the noisiest of wars, we seek to weaken them again by organizing these orchestras of gunfire and these assaults of heavy artillery. And you can hear it, listen. Sounds like war, right? Like you can see the bombs bursting and fighting. You know, like this is what they're listening to in their iPod in their foxhole to really get them going. Next slide, please. So during this time, they were also recuperating. They were recuperating from the war. And some people saw jazz as a very good homeopathic remedy for what ailed France in particular. This was a quote from John Cortu about the music of Murray Pilser and his band. He thought, you know, he saw the potential for change in this new music. They were just so pent up with this just flowy, you know, orchestrated stuff. Well, now they had a little bit of beat to it, and they didn't know what to do with it. Some rejected it, but some people really appreciated and accepted it. Jean-Paul Sartre, however you say that, said jazz was a good way to shake off the burden of its traumatic history and liberate the present from France's past. Another said there's nothing like jazz for the impotence of a too civilized ear. So you can see how they felt too civilized, they felt too intellectually stimulated. They wanted that primitive, that jungle noise, they wanted the beat. Some people kind of wanted the war to keep going. Next, please. Oh, and also I wanted to say, with the drums, it's interesting, in the recuperation after any war, there's always some sort of venting process or venting mechanism that people will go through. The Roaring Twenties, for example, out here, people just drink, they go crazy and they party. And the cymbals, the hi-hat and the crash and all those other ones on the drums kind of made that sound of like a release valve. And it was kind of releasing the pressure a little bit. You have a cymbal sound. That's not it. Well, you guys know what a cymbal sounds like. It's kind of like has that hissing. So it was representative of that. And then the music of jazz, it's kind of poppy and punchy. And it was almost as if they were releasing and then breaking through that. You'll find. So they were trying to break through this staleness they were in with music that reflected the war, but they were twisting it to recuperate from the war. So arguably, the most important evolution or change and shift in the French culture at the time was their perception of Africans, or those of African heritage, black people, whatever you want to call it. But they called them, when it first came out, the genre wasn't called jazz, it was called Negre Primitive. It was primitive black music. In jazz, it became a standard. French writers used them because these ways of describing the music rang true with the existing cultural ideology and discursive harmonics at the time. So this is the whole culture. Just saw these people as primitive. They didn't, some wanted to hear their music, some wanted nothing to do with them. They weren't sure what to do with it. But those who really did accept this new music and saw it as a platform to really excel and accelerate the growth of their country, really accepted it, and they started changing. The terms started changing slowly but surely. Lucien Levy-Bruhl wrote The Primitive Mentality, which kind of went through and explained what it meant, where they came from, their culture, their history, why the music was what it was. But she still referred to them as having a primitive mentality. Well, Andre Scheffner wasn't having any of that. So he saw the potential, and he really enjoyed the music, and he knew something had to change. So he shifted single-handedly the label they put on the music as Afro and Zeri Kane, which obviously is where we get Afro-American from. Is that person right there in this time, African-American, was now a thing. They weren't primitive, they weren't jungle people, they were American, but from Africa. And then, to take it a step further, like the last step in really realizing, coming to a realization of peace and harmony with these people and acceptance of them as a people, not just their music, was when George Watteau wrote, they are now blacks who got civilized with us. So now you're just looking at the skin, they're just, yeah, they're blacks, okay, we're whites. They are civilized. They got civilized, but not later than us, or not, they're going to get civilized later, but they got civilized, they are civilized with us. So now they see them as one and the same, they're on the same playing field. So, I'm not using my cards as much as I thought I would. So jazz really changed everything. And if not everything, it at least was representative of everything that was changing during this time. At least in terms of modernization, recuperation, and Afro-appreciation. Food represented the French appreciation for all types of art, especially the edible culinary, and that transcends through all aspects of life, like fashion. Their language is very artistic. You see it everywhere. Their food, the art of the religion is artistic. But the religion reveals the dynamic and evolutionary metaphysical perspective of this rich culture, and the history reveals how the French have come to have that rich, multifaceted, and ethnocentrically evolving, really, culture. So, merci beaucoup.
We have Madeline.